I do. I mean, I came to America, the first time I came to America, I came to do theater.
What if one of the most respected actresses of our time, an icon of class, power, and elegance, had been carrying a secret list her entire career? Not of awards, but of the men who tried to break her. Names you've seen on movie posters, cheered for the Oscars. Names she can no longer stay silent about. At 80 years old, Helen Mirren, an icon of elegance, intellect, and fearless authenticity, decided she would no longer hold her silence. Her voice, once tempered by the cold machinery of Hollywood, now rang clear with truth and defiance. With the wisdom and scars of a lifetime in the spotlight, Mirren pulled back the heavy curtain on her past to reveal 5 men who, despite their fame and charm, left indelible marks of betrayal on her soul. Her confession wasn't born from bitterness, but from decades of pain, suppression, and survival. What made a woman as accomplished as Helen Mirren harbor such enduring hatred? What happened behind closed doors to silence her for so long? And why now? Born on July 26, 1945, into a working-class immigrant family in England, Helen's journey to stardom defied all odds. Her father warned her against pursuing acting, believing the industry to be corrupt and degrading to women. But Helen was undeterred. Driven by a fiery determination and a dream that refused to die, she carved her path through prejudice, rejection, and exploitation. Her rise to the top was not a tale of fairy tale fortune, but of grit, pain, and rebellion. Beneath the glitz of magazine covers and the prestige of awards lay a darker tale, one that would remain buried until she was ready to tell it. Hollywood never gave Helen anything freely. She was once told she wasn't sexy enough to succeed, until her body was commodified and plastered on film posters to attract male audiences. She endured backroom deals, exploitative casting sessions, and was once coerced into shooting a nude scene not mentioned in her contract. More than once, she found herself crying alone in hotel bathrooms, gutted by the emotional cost of survival, an industry built on male dominance. But she didn't give up. She fought back tooth and nail and emerged as a woman Hollywood couldn't mold, a symbol of independence, brilliance, and rebellion. Now, with age freeing her from the need for approval, Helen Mirren named the 5 men who shaped her pain and disillusionment, men who betrayed her in ways the public never knew. The first name she revealed shocked no one: Harvey Weinstein. She described Weinstein not merely as a predator, but as a vacuum of empathy, a hollow man who consumed women's dignity and discarded them without remorse. Helen recalled stepping into a meeting for what she believed was a career-changing role, only to be met with Weinstein's leering gaze and lecherous propositions. When she refused his unspoken demands, her opportunity vanished overnight. Her calls went unanswered, her name quietly blacklisted. It wasn't just a personal violation that scarred her. It was witnessing Weinstein's reign of terror over countless women, many of whom were too frightened to speak. To Helen, Weinstein wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of a broken system that traded dreams for silence. Next came Liam Neeson, once the great love of her life, and ultimately the man who left her emotionally hollow. Their romance in the 1980s was intense and unapologetic. Helen confessed she loved Liam so deeply she would have given up acting for him. They were inseparable, admired publicly, and deeply connected, or so she thought. The relationship cracked under the weight of secrecy, betrayal, and manipulation. Helen turned a blind eye to warning signs, lipstick on collars, unfamiliar perfumes, missed calls, until the truth exploded one fateful winter afternoon. She returned home unexpectedly and found Liam in their bed with another woman, 20 years younger, indifferent, unapologetic. Liam merely said, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," offering no regret for betrayal itself. That moment crushed her. Helen shut off emotionally for years, unwilling to trust again. She didn't just lose love, she lost herself. Liam Neeson became the face of heartbreak that lingered for nearly a decade, a wound time never fully closed. The third man on her list was Robert Redford, an icon, a colleague, and the man who publicly humiliated her in front of millions. It was the 1995 BAFTA Awards. Helen was a nominee, and Redford had been chosen to introduce her. She expected grace. Instead, she received a slap masked as a compliment. On stage, Redford said, "No one acts quite like Helen Mirren." She always makes you believe that middle-aged women can still be seductive. The audience laughed. Helen didn't. To them, it was a harmless quip. To her, it was a reductive, patronizing insult that minimized her artistry to mere sexual relevance. In a moment that should have honored her talent, Redford reduced her to a punchline. Helen realized then that some men don't need to scream or abuse to belittle women. They do it with charm, cloaked in silk, smiling as they strike. Her resentment for Redford was rooted not in that single comment, but in the decades of subtle condescension women endure from men who hide behind polished words. Then there was Peter Brook, her revered mentor, and ultimately the man who betrayed her not in love or ambition, but in principle. As one of the most celebrated theater directors of the 20th century, Brook had discovered Helen as a young talent and helped shape her early career. She once believed she owed him everything. But years later, when a fellow actress accused Brook of abuse and coercion, the director made a shocking move. In an effort to protect himself, he publicly held up Helen as proof of his innocence. Without her consent, he declared, "Helen Mirren is a perfect example. I've worked with her for decades, and nothing inappropriate ever occurred." That single sentence turned Helen into a shield, a pawn in a public game of deflection. She was never asked if she supported him, never given a choice. Had she spoken against him, her career might have collapsed. So she stayed silent, trapped between loyalty and fear. Only after Brooks' death did she reveal the truth. She had known something was wrong, but was too afraid to speak. Her hatred for him stemmed not from any personal assault, but from the manipulation and cowardice of using her voice to silence others. Finally, Helen revealed a name that carried not personal betrayal, but moral outrage: Mel Gibson. Unlike the others, Gibson had never loved her, mentored her, or worked closely with her. But his public behavior, his violent outbursts, and his hateful rhetoric made him, in Helen's eyes, the embodiment of everything toxic in industry. His infamous 2006 arrest, where he hurled anti-Semitic slurs at police, was a turning point. Helen was appalled not only by his actions, but by Hollywood's willingness to protect him. She vowed never to work on any project involving Gibson, even if it meant losing major roles. What disgusted her most were the leaked recordings of Gibson verbally abusing his partner, including one where he told her she deserved to be raped by a pack of racial slurs. For Helen, the issue transcended personal grievances. Gibson represented the unchecked power of men who hurt others and continued to be rewarded. She despised him not for what he did to her, but for what he did to the industry, to women, and to humanity. These 5 men, each infamous in their own way, left a trail of pain, each playing a role in Helen Mirren's lifelong struggle for dignity and justice. Weinstein, the predator who punished her for saying no. Neeson, the lover who shattered her heart. Redford, the charmer who humiliated her with praise. Brook, the mentor who used her name to save his own. And Gibson, the public figure who symbolized the very darkness she spent her life fighting against. At 80, Helen Mirren stood not just as a survivor, but as a warrior who finally named her enemies. Her voice carried the weight of generations of silenced women, of dreams warped by betrayal, of talent suppressed by egos. In her powerful words, "I don't regret hating them. I only regret not saying it sooner." She didn't seek vengeance. She sought truth. She sought justice. And in doing so, she gave the world a story Hollywood never wanted told. A story not about the glory of stardom, but the high price it often demands from those brave enough to chase it. When Helen Mirren finally opened the door to her truth, it wasn't with a scream. It was with a calm, unshakable voice sharpened by decades of silence. Naming the 5 men she most despised wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming power in a world that had tried time and again to strip it from her. Her decision to speak up at 80, after a lifetime of success and suffering, wasn't random. It was deliberate. She had waited, not because she lacked courage, but because the system had been rigged to destroy women who dared speak. But time and experience had made her immune to those threats. There was no studio left to impress, no producer left to fear. All that remained was her truth, and the freedom to tell it. After revealing her harrowing encounters with Weinstein, Neeson, Redford, Brook, and Gibson, many expected Helen to step back, as if simply airing those names would be enough. But for her, it was only the beginning. The act of exposing them wasn't meant to ignite scandal. It was a form of personal exorcism. Each name had occupied space in her psyche like a ghost. Each memory, once buried, had been screaming to be released. And while these 5 men represented different forms of betrayal, sexual coercion, romantic devastation, public humiliation, professional manipulation, and moral abhorrence, they were all linked by one thing. They had taken something from her and expected her to smile through it. But Helen never forgot who she was. From her earliest days on stage, she had been taught that being a woman in performing arts required not just talent, but resilience. Her very femininity was weaponized against her. She'd been told to soften her voice, slim her body, hide her strength. She played queens, but she was often treated like a pawn. That contradiction, public adoration versus private oppression, was what defined so much of her life. And it's why, when she finally found the strength to confront it all, she chose not to whisper, but to roar. In interviews, Helen often joked about the iron rod up her spine, the unyielding dignity she carried through both red carpets and broken hearts. But behind the scenes, that dignity came at a steep cost. There were nights she couldn't sleep, days when she questioned whether any of it, fame, success, applause, was worth the things she'd had to endure. When she was in her 30s, she briefly considered quitting the industry entirely. She thought about running off to a small village somewhere, disappearing from the screen forever. But then she realized that leaving wouldn't make the pain go away. It would only mean letting the people who tried to silence her win. And so she stayed. She didn't just survive, she flourished. But she never forgot. And now, years later, those memories resurfaced with startling clarity. What haunted her the most wasn't always the acts themselves, but the reactions. The way people laughed at Redford's BAFTA comment. The way Liam Neeson never once apologized with sincerity. The way Peter Brook used her name like a get-out-of-jail-free card. The way Harvey Weinstein's victims were left in the shadows for so long. And the way the industry bent over backwards to welcome Mel Gibson back, as if nothing had happened. To Helen, these weren't isolated misdeeds. They were reflections of a system designed to protect power and punish truth. After speaking out, she received messages from women she hadn't spoken to in years. Former co-stars, makeup artists, assistants, and crew members, each with their own stories. Some cried. Some thanked her. Some admitted they still couldn't say out loud what happened to them. Helen listened. She told them she understood. And in each story, she saw pieces of her own past mirrored back at her. If her voice could give even one of them the courage to speak up or feel seen, then everything she endured would not be in vain. But the aftermath of her revelation wasn't easy. There was backlash, of course. Certain tabloids called her bitter. Some fans of the men she named accused her of lying for attention. But Helen had long stopped caring about approval. She didn't need anyone's validation. Her truth wasn't up for debate. And for every critic, there were hundreds who stood with her, women and men who had seen enough hypocrisy in the entertainment world to know that she was telling the truth. Helen also reflected on how her silence over the years wasn't always due to fear. It was also strategy. When she was younger, she saw what happened to women who spoke out. They were blacklisted, ridiculed, painted as difficult or emotional. She watched careers evaporate because someone dared to say no to a powerful man. She vowed never to be destroyed like that. Instead, she bided her time, outlasted them all, and spoke only when she was beyond the reach of retaliation. And yet, in the quiet moments after the headlines faded, Helen was left to reckon with the emotional residue of it all. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the shame she had internalized that wasn't hers to carry. She journaled. She painted. She sat in long silences and let herself feel what she had long suppressed. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending for decades that you're unbothered, that nothing got to you. Now, for the first time, she let it all rise to the surface. Strangely, what helped her most was not solitude, but conversation. She began reaching out to younger actresses, those still navigating the brutal path she had once walked. She mentored them, not with sugar-coated advice, but with raw honesty. "Don't let anyone tell you silence is classy," she told one rising star. Class doesn't matter when you're being destroyed from the inside. Her words became scripture for a new generation of women determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. But perhaps the most mysterious and intriguing thread left hanging was the mention of a woman who, Helen said, had once made her cry out of pure rage. Not sadness, not jealousy, rage. That revelation sent ripples through the public imagination. Who could this woman be? Was she a rival? A friend turned foe? A studio executive? An actress who betrayed her? The question lingered like fog over an already stormy tale. Helen refused to name her, at least not yet. She hinted that it was someone the public respected, someone with influence, someone who had once claimed to stand for women's rights, but betrayed that very cause when it really counted. She broke something in me, Helen said in one interview. Not my heart, my trust. That's all she would say. For now, what Helen made clear, though, was that betrayal didn't only come from men. In an industry where women are pitted against each other for roles, accolades, and acceptance, some of the deepest wounds came from within their own ranks. The competition, the manipulation, the performance of solidarity that evaporates the moment it's inconvenient. Helen had seen it all. And while the men she named caused some of her most visible pain, this unnamed woman caused the most personal rupture. One Helen still wasn't ready to fully expose. But she promised that one day she would. In the meantime, Helen Mirren continued her work, not just as an actress, but as an advocate. She didn't join movements for the optics. She didn't give sanitized speeches. She spoke from experience, and her words carried the weight of survival. She wasn't interested in trending hashtags or press campaigns. She wanted change, tangible, meaningful change, safer sets, transparent leadership, real consequences for abusers, and most of all, a culture where women's value isn't determined by their compliance. Looking back on her life, Helen didn't see herself as a victim. She saw herself as a woman who endured what should never have been asked of her and lived to tell the tale. A warrior, not a casualty. And though she had every right to be angry, she chose instead to be purposeful. She turned her rage into revelation, her scars into stories, and her pain into power. For every fan who ever adored her for her regal roles, there's now a deeper reason to respect her. For the courage it took to speak when it no longer served her career, but served something far more important, the truth. And as the final chapters of her story unfold, one thing is certain. Helen Mirren will never again be silent. Not for Hollywood. Not for love. Not for anyone. Helen Mirren's story isn't just about fame. It's about survival, silence, and the cost of dignity in an industry that often values image over integrity. Her decision to finally speak wasn't a cry for attention. It was a masterclass in timing, power, and truth. From toxic power plays to emotional betrayals, she's shown us that behind every red carpet is a battlefield we rarely see. And while her revelation shook the industry, her silence about one final name, the woman, still echoes louder than words. If her past holds this much weight, imagine what she's still holding back. If this story moved you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. We're just getting started. In our next deep dive, we'll explore the hidden feuds and fragile alliances behind some of Hollywood's most untouchable icons. Until then, remember this. Helen Mirren never asked for your applause. She demanded your attention, and now she has it.